Well, whom? Now, when we see whom, what does that mean, folks?
What is it?
It means them, male and female. Whom? So, what whom? Let me look. So, fiha azwajun tahar. Mutaharatun. Yeah, because that's tarmabuta, right? Right?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. And they shall have therein azwajun mutaharatun. That's a tongue twister for me. Ibn Abi Talha reported that Ibn Abbas said, purified from filth and impurity. So these pure mates that we'll have in paradise, and see, we can't even imagine this, do not defecate, they do not urinate, they do not do anything, we don't do any of that in paradise. There's no menses in paradise. So also, Mujahid said for menstruation, relieving the call of nature, urine, we will not expectorate. There will be no pregnancies in paradise. Also, Qatada said, purified from impurity and sin. In another narration, he said, from menstruation and pregnancy. Further, Ata al-Hasan, Ad-Dahak, Abu Salih, Atiyah, and Asudi were reported to have said similarly Allah's statement. And they will abide therein forever, meaning ultimate happiness. For the believers will enjoy everlasting delight, safe from death and disruption of their bliss. For it never ends or ceases. So we ask Allah to make us strong and among these believers. For He is the most generous, most kind, and most merciful. The hadith reports that one of the first parties of the people of paradise will be when death is destroyed. Now folks, what's going to happen is that when we get to paradise, there's going to be a party. And all I know from the hadith is like there's going to be something slaughtered, and that's going to be the end of death. But we'll all be there. It's going to be this great big party.
Will we recognize each other?
Yes. But never again will we have the pain of death. Never again will we have the pain of losing anyone. Never again will we have the pain of grief. There will be no grief there and no sorrow there. The Prophet ﷺ reported that the women in paradise were so beautiful that he could see their bone marrow. You see, this is another dimension, folks, that I'm talking about. It's like you're going to have X-ray vision. But you won't be in a lustful state. It won't be used to see something that you would have seen on the earth. But it's going to be such an elevated form of sight that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I know this is a dimension that we can understand. But this is what this life is for, this short life that we have, so that we can live like this. Such a small price. You know, we think as young people that it's such a big deal when we give up drinking and smoking marijuana and dating and all this kind of stuff that the world has deluded us to believe is so beautiful. But look what we're getting. A dimension that we truly cannot understand. But what an elevated and transformed state. But this is what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said. If two believers on the day of judgment had equal deeds, except one had said Subhanallah one more time than the other, the distance of the one's place in paradise from the other would be like us looking at the stars. So you talk about 7 levels of paradise. And that me and Brother Eunice had the very same deeds in paradise. Except that I said Subhanallah one more time than he did. That the distance between he and I would be like looking at the stars at night. That's the paradise we live for. The word azwaj, or singular zawj, is used for both husband and wife. In paradise, the spouses will be joined on the basis of piety. If a spouse lived a pious life in this world and the other did not, justice will be served by Allah, and in the hereafter their marriage will be dissolved. The pious spouse will be united with his pious spouse. The pure are for the pure. If both spouses were pious here, they will continue to live as husband and wife forever. And guess what? They actually get bumped up to first class. So if one spouse was better than the other one, in that case, they actually get bumped up to the class of that spouse. And this is part of that dimension which we cannot understand. This is part of the mercy and the grace, the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is also why that in marriage is so important in Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that marriage is half of your faith. Look what can be achieved in paradise just by having a good marriage. Bumped up to first class, the benefits. You talk about, these different credit cards and they offer you travel miles and all that kind of stuff. And after you get so many miles, you go up to first class. All you got to do is just get a good wife, a good zawj, a good partner. So I want to make sure I'm gender specific here. Men and women. Yes, brother?
Now, in a specific situation, say that, for example, Muslim women are not allowed to marry any other Christian marriage here, right? So I have to use, let's say if a Muslim man married a Christian woman, how does that work out?
Works the same way. Because men are allowed to marry women of the book. So it's very simple.
And even
If that practicing Christian, that practicing Jew is better than you, then you get bumped up because they're believers. They're people of the book. And he says that we will get upgraded according to our spouses. Whatever Allah has made halal, Jew, Christian, or Muslim, will be upgraded according to our spouse. Listen to verse 26, folks. Verily, Allah is not ashamed to set forth a parable even of a mosquito or a gnat. Some translations say gnat, some translations say a mosquito. Or so much more that it is bigger, or less when it is smaller than it. And as for those who believe, they know that it is the truth from their Lord. But as for those who disbelieve, they say, what did Allah intend by this parable? By it, He misleads many, and many He guides thereby. And He misleads thereby only the fasiqeen, the rebellious, disobedient to Allah. Verse 27, those who break Allah's covenant after ratifying it, and sever what Allah has ordered to be joined and do mischief on earth, it is they who are the losers. What does that mean? What are the losers? Those who go to the hellfire. That's the losers. Powerful verse. Let's look at it. In his Tafseer As-Sudi, reported that Ibn Abbas, Ibn Masud, and some companions said when Allah gave these two examples of the hypocrites, meaning Allah's statements, their likeness is as the likeness of one who kindled a fire, and or like a rainstorm from the sky. The hypocrite said, Allah is far more exalted than for him to make such examples. So Allah revealed these ayat in Surah Al-Baqarah 26 and 27 up to, who are the losers? Sayyid said that Qatada said, Allah does not shy away from the truth when He mentions a matter as a parable, whether this matter is significant or not. When Allah mentioned the flies and the spider in His book, the people of misguidance said, why did Allah mention these things? So Allah revealed, verily Allah is not ashamed to set forth a parable even of a mosquito, or so much more when it is bigger, or less when it is smaller than it. In these verses, the no doubt factor is reiterated. And if one has doubt, they should rise up to the unattainable challenge to create a verse like it. You see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His wisdom uses analogies that we relate to, like a gnat or a mosquito. You see, those people who are puffed up and proud, we talked a little bit about Shakespeare last week. They want to impress people. So they may not use an analogy like this. But then people have to read it over and over and over to figure out what they're talking about. But by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala using these examples that we relate to, we absolutely get a clear, crystal clear understanding of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing out to us. The arrogance of man would delude him to believe that the Word of God would not employ contemptible creatures like mosquitoes, ants, or gnats in its parables, as man would see this as undignified or unbecoming to the majesty of Allah. The degenerate man would assume this transgresses the principles of eloquence. Disbelief drains humans of the capacity to see or hear things in a proper perspective. You see, folks, when you do not have the guidance of Allah, you are in misguidance, and you're not able to see things in a proper perspective. You're not able to reason. That's why at the beginning of every time we're going to give you guidance, we say, he who is guided by Allah, there is no misguidance. Those who are not guided by Allah, there is no guide for them. In these verses, who is the fasik or the fasikun? From the root fasaka, to go outside or to stray beyond the limit. In Sharia, fisq signifies going beyond the circle of obedience to Allah, or transgressing the commandments of Allah. Transgression does not stop at being merely disobedient in one's actions, but can sometimes lead to outright denial and disbelief. Those who break the covenant with Allah. Now this is amazing, folks. Listen up, because this is really, really powerful. Many people misunderstand this verse. I want you to look at the beauty of this verse. This refers to the covenant that all men and women made with Allah before any of them came into this earth. In Surah 7, it's one of my favorite verses in the Holy Quran. Verse 172. And mention when your Lord took from the children of Adam, from their loins, their descendants, and made them testify of themselves, saying to them, am I not your Lord? They said, yes, we have testified this, lest you should say on the day of resurrection, indeed we were of this unaware. You see, there was a meeting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had before He ever placed any of us in the wombs of our mother. And we testified that there's no God but God at that time. And we said to Allah as souls, before we were ever made into human beings, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. And then we said, in the event of the day of resurrection, we must be prepared. We will not be able to say that we were not made aware. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called us before He ever put His Spirit in your mother's womb. That's how important every single one of you are that are here today. And I pray that every young person hears this. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala found you so special. I pray that all of us hear it, but particularly to you. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala found you so special that He called you out and you testified to His oneness before you were ever a human being. That you already did your Shahada. That's why we say that people are born Muslim. People are born into submission to Allah because they submitted when they were souls. They said, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. So a lot of people say that we were born Muslim because we came out in prostration, or because of the verse that says man was born Muslim, but his parents made him this or made him that. This is when we became Muslim, folks. Before we were ever thought about. Some people will say, oh, well, this child was a mistake. This child was a slip-up. There's no slip-ups. There's no mistakes in the kingdom of Allah. This acceptance and affirmation of Allah as your only Lord and Master requires that men and women should in no way be disobedient to Him. The Quran and all the prophets came down to the world to remind us of our covenant. What's the covenant, folks? But when did we make it? Before the sperm ever hit the egg. Allahu Akbar. The Quran and all the prophets came down to the world to remind us of our covenants, to renew it, and to teach it in a way that believers act upon it. If people break the covenant, how can they ever expect to learn and implement? You see, if you break this very covenant, the covenant of Tawheed, this is what's so important, folks. This is why it goes back to the verse again, that Islam is built on what? Tawheed and Risalah. If you break that covenant, that there's one God, and He gave me a book that there's no doubt, and I am His servant, and therefore I cannot be owned by one servant, one master, and serve another master, then we give our all, our whole being, our countenance, our life, our living and our dying for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Islam is relationship oriented. The cutting asunder of what Allah has commanded to be joined includes all kinds of relationships. The one between Allah and His servant, the one between us and our parents and our relatives, between us and our neighbor and friends, between one Muslim and another. You see, Islam is not an individualistic approach. It is a collective approach. Very hard for us to understand in a society that is very proud of individualism. Islam calls us to fulfill one's obligations with regards to all these relationships and to follow Allah's laws. Deficiency in fulfilling these obligations produces all kinds of disorders among mankind, and transgressors create destruction for others and for themselves. If we look at the Muslim world, folks, we look at Syria right now, because people aren't maintaining relationships according to the dictates of Allah. What's happening? What's happening? Muslims are killing Muslims. And what does it say in the Quran? If a Muslim kills a Muslim, their home will be in the hellfire. What does it say in the Quran? If you kill anyone, any human being, without just cause, it's like killing 9 billion people. It says the whole of mankind. We've lost our way, folks. We're not abiding by the contract, by the covenant that we made as souls. before we were entered into our mother's womb. We might have come out in prostration to Allah. 85% of us came out in sujood. The only ones that didn't were either breech or cesarean. But they were twisted up somehow. They didn't come out in prostration to Allah. The Quran says that these are the losers in this world and the hereafter. Look at the loss that's happening in Muslim countries. Forgive me, in countries highly populated by Muslims. I will not call it a Muslim country. Abu Jafar al-Razi reported that Arabi bin Anas commented on this ayat from chapter 2 and verse 26. This is an example that Allah has given for the life of this world. The mosquitoes live as long as it needs food, but when it gets fat, it dies. This is also the example of people whom Allah mentioned in the Quran. When they acquire and collect the delights of this world, and the life of this world, Allah takes them away. You see, a lot of people are like the mosquitoes. They have these huge, big, fat bank accounts. And they live these big lives. But they're going to be like the mosquito. They're going to die and they're going to be losers. This beautiful verse in chapter 6, verse 44. So when they forgot the warning with which they had been reminded, we opened for them the gates of every pleasant thing. In this ayah, chapter 2 and verse 26, Allah stated that He does not shy away or hesitate in making an example or parable of anything, whether the example involve a significant or insignificant matter such as a mosquito or a gnat. I love the hadith when it said that Prophet Muhammad referred to a black ant on a black rock in the black of night. If that's not one of the most graphic pictures in the world, who would think of such a simple analogy? A black ant on a black rock in the black of night. Talk about blindness. You can't see any of those things in true dark. Talk about losing. Allah's statement for so much more when it is bigger than it. Fama, Falkaha means something bigger than the mosquito, which is one of the most insignificant and tiniest of creatures. Muslim narrated that Aisha said that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that no Muslim is harmed by a thorn. Fama fakaha. Falkaha. Thank you. Or something larger. But a good deed will be written for him, and an evil deed will be erased from his record. You see, folks, if we aren't patient, we lose this reward. That's why we have to develop sabr in our lives. We have to recognize, qadr, that everything is coming to us as a gift from Allah. So Allah has informed us that there is no matter that is too small that is exempt from being used as an example, even if it was as insignificant as a gnat, mosquito, or a spider. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah 22, verse 73, O mankind, a similitude has been coined, so listen to it carefully. Verily, those on whom you call besides Allah cannot create even a fly. Can Buddha create a fly? No. Well, how do you say it?
No, it was cute.
Everybody know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure my southern twang comes out occasionally. And if you don't understand me, just let me know.